Hey, good morning. Today is another one of our first fives. Today we're looking at this text from John chapter 15. So, in truth, I'm not much of a gardener. I'm pretty good at cutting grass, and I'm pretty good at keeping those lines relatively straight. But I find some people who really understand gardening, right? They really know how to cut back certain things. Like I cut back bushes once a year, whether they need it or not. I'm not really good at cutting back trees. I don't really quite grasp that. I just basically cut down the branch and think we're good. But I do know that if you cut things correctly, they actually become more fruitful. They actually have better leaves and better fruit and better produce or better flowers. Like that's just how that works. And so this passage, Jesus seems to understand that we often miss that sometimes there's some hard work that needs to happen for us to become even better. And so he uses this analogy of working in a garden. So here it is, John chapter 15. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. Now, I'm pretty sure I know what Jesus is saying here. We're called to live lives that are fruitful. Got it. With you. Makes sense, Jesus. We should bear fruit with our life. Now, he gives us all kinds of other spots in the Gospels to talk about what fruit should look like. In fact, Paul writes about the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. Right? These things should define the characteristics of the followers of Jesus. But it's interesting to me here, another line Jesus has here. He says, you're not my disciples if you're not bearing good fruit. Well, that requires some self-reflection. Are you and I bearing good fruit? Are we looking at our lives and are good things happening? And then he also talks about this idea that we would prune stuff. In other words, maybe I could say it this way. I understand athletics a lot better than I understand gardening. So here's how it works with muscles, right? If you are tearing down a muscle while working out or while exercising, that muscle actually strengthens itself, and when it rebuilds itself, it's stronger than it was before. Or maybe think of it this way. When you train for a sport, you go into strict training. I mean, Paul writes about this later, right? You work really, really hard, and then what you find is through that hard work, you're better than you were before. But in the middle of that hard work, in the middle of that discipline, in the middle of that exercise, that one more rep, that one more time, in the middle of that, it's really hard. And so what Jesus is trying to say here is sometimes God's got to do some hard work in our lives. And so here's where we got to be kind of honest with ourselves. Those fruits of the Spirit that I mentioned earlier, that we would bear much fruit, where do we not reflect them? Right? For some of us, we have no self-control. That we vomit out the mouth whatever we're thinking, and so self-control is out the window. Or maybe we have no patience. Maybe we have no gentleness. I mean, some of these things are kind of hard for us. Maybe we have no joy. We have no peace. Maybe we're not very kind. These are things that are called the fruits of the Spirit. In other words, they're the overflow of our life. And what Jesus is saying here is, hey, listen, if you don't have these things in your life, it's not because God doesn't want you to have them. It's because maybe you haven't allowed God to do the hard work in you. But the good news for us is Jesus wants to do that hard work in our lives. Often it happens when people are close to us. In fact, I've told the story numerous times, and you maybe have already heard it before. But it's been a few years ago now. I met with a consultant who was working with our church, and he sat in my office for a couple hours, and he almost felt like he just ripped me to shreds for a long period of time. He called out some weaknesses in my personality and in my character, and who I was and what drove me, my ego and some pride and all kinds of stuff. And it was really, really painful. But what I will tell you out of that is I take an honest look at some parts of my life that I maybe hadn't looked at enough or looked closely enough. And what began to happen was God began to work in me, and some of those things I began to see as they really were. And God did this pretty cool work in me, and is continuing to do that work in me. And I have not yet arrived, and some of those same things still drive me. But here's the cool thing. I know this. I know that really hard conversation in my office with someone who did deeply care about me eventually led to God doing a pruning work in me It wasn't fun. In fact, some members of our church board and my wife were like, "Are you okay?" And no, I wasn't okay because it messed me up, but in all the right ways. And so here's my challenge to you today. Find someone. Find someone who's willing to say the hard things to you that you know loves you, who's further along in their spiritual journey than you are, and let them mentor you. Let them disciple you. Let them help God prune you. And then what you'll find is some areas that you didn't think you could grow in, or you didn't even know you needed to grow in, God might do a work in you. And all of a sudden, those fruits of the Spirit, you're living a life that's bearing fruit and others see it. And so that's my invitation today. Let's be people who remain in Him, who is Jesus. And we'll find that the more we remain in Him, and the more we allow others to help prune us, because God uses people, the more we'll find that we look like His Son, Jesus. And then that will change everything, not just in our lives, but for those lives of those around us. Because who doesn't want to be with a person who's full of more love and more joy and more peace and more patience and more kindness and more goodness and more gentleness and more self-control? Honestly, those are the kind of people we all feel a little guilty more around, realizing, man, I should be more like them. And so let's you and I become more like Jesus. And let's find out together that when we do that, we really can change the world. And so may your day be filled with the goodness of God, and may you and I be filled with His Spirit. We'll catch you next time for another First Five.